Pete Rose will be joining us shortly to talk about the life of Willie Mays. Obviously, you've heard about Willie Mays and how great of a baseball player he was. And, a lot of people may not know this. He was the godfather to Barry Bonds. But he was also an inspiration to so many African-American players. He started his career in the old Negro Leagues. He played for the Birmingham Black Barons in high school. Then he graduated and was drafted by the New York Giants. Then they moved to San Francisco area, and he played with the San Francisco Giants. And then, obviously, came back, played a couple years with the New York Mets in his 40s, and was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1979. But, I mean, this guy was such an all-around player, not just the power and the drove in almost 2,000 runs and 24-time All-Star, multiple Gold Gloves. I mean, he was an exceptional teacher to a lot of these guys. He was always – I just watched the clip. It was about a 10-minute interview that Vince Scully and somebody eavesdropped and taped it. And they were just going back and forth and going over kind of not just Willie's career, but Willie talking about other players and things like that, what he liked, disliked, things like that. So this guy, I mean, baseball was his life. But it could not have been easy as an African-American player coming up in the 50s, right after Jackie Robinson, starting, like I said, with the Birmingham Black Barons in 1948, the year after Jackie broke in and broke the color barrier in the major leagues. And then in 1951, after he had been drafted in 1950, won the Rookie of the Year. And obviously a couple years later after his military service, like he stopped in 52, 53, came back in 54 and won one of his most valuable player awards then. So such a spectacular career life as he passes away at 93 years old. Many times I was able to interview him and just talk to him. But what you realize from, the meeting the Buck O'Neills in my life, or the Willie Mayses, Don Newcombs, some of these gentlemen that played in the old Negro Leagues and transitioned into the major leagues, absolute gentlemen, never like held a grudge against society for the way that they were treated. That's one of my favorite things, that this guy had such a joy when you were ever talking about baseball from any level to the major leagues. Just loved talking baseball.
I just love hearing stories about the guys that were back in that era that were barnstorming. And for those who don't know, they basically were going from town to town playing whoever was, available to play. And just total respect for him. I know that Pete thinks of this, Kirchen thinks of this. The legends of the game consider him to be the greatest.
Another legend joins us on the phone to discuss Willie Mays' life. Pete Rose, my first manager in the major leagues, one of the greatest baseball players ever to play in the major leagues. Pete, you got to see Willie after you came into the major leagues, 1965, when he was the most valuable player. When did you start to know how good Willie Mays was in your life?
Well, I was about 12 or 13, growing up in Cincinnati. I mean, Willie was always just a great player to watch. Then when I become a big leaguer, Willie was such a nice guy to young players. He wanted all the young players to feel at home when they played the game of baseball. Then, of course, I started making all-star games and was on the same team with Willie, which even made it, even bigger and better, because he was such a personality. I mean, we all know he was a great player, but he was always smiling, always happy to be on the field, to be in uniform, and those are the kind of things I'll remember. But, Buck, we called him Buck. Buck Mays, that's what we called him. And he was such a good player for such a long period of time. And everyone liked Willie because the type of guy he was. He just was an aggressive, great, hustling type young player to become one of the greatest, if not the greatest of all time. When you talk about the greatest of all time, you got to mention Willie and you got to mention Babe Ruth. Those are the two names that come to me. And of course, then you got Hank Aaron, is the show in that group. So I got to play Willie and Henry, the same time. A lot of times at the All-Star game, and they were like the same type people. They just, although Willie was more outgoing, he was more outgoing with his teammates. and especially the young teammates, because he made us all feel like we belong there. And someone that has that ability to do that, you got to really take your hat off to it.
What were some of the things that you can remember, and because he was great at everything and every attribute of baseball, but what was something like, man, this guy's better at that than anyone else to do it?
Well, I think one thing that he was that he never gets credit for, he was a great base runner, not base stealer. He could steal bases too, but he was one of those guys that never got thrown out at third and end the inning, never got thrown out at second to start the inning, those type of guys. So fundamentally, Willie Mays was really a sound baseball player, especially when it comes to running bases.
Talking to Pete Rose, one of the greatest baseball players ever to play in his era, and talking about Willie Mays, one of the greatest baseball players to play. Won 12 Gold Gloves. Defensively, was he a shallow center fielder? I mean, we remember him for the catch in the World Series, but you played against him so many times day to day and things like that. And knowing you, trying to probably hit it away from Willie Mays because you didn't want him to rob you of hits and doubles and things like that. What do you remember about where Willie played in the field?
Well, he played shallow because he was such a good outfielder going back on the ball, just like the one we're talking about, the catch. I mean, he seemed like he was running for 2 minutes to get to that ball. And it was straight over. But don't forget, the Polo Grounds, I think that's where it was about 475 feet to straightaway center field. So Willie knew he had a lot of space. He was kind of confined at Candlestick Park, because he couldn't really show his defense off, because anything over his head usually went out of the ballpark. So, you play according to the type of field you're playing at. And Willie was great at playing shallow, taking hits away from you, great at going back for the ball, taking hits away from you. So pitchers had to love having Willie Mays on his ball club playing center field.
Was there anything about him going from New York to San Francisco, just East Coast to West Coast? It felt like nothing really changed in his game. It didn't really bother him, but do you have a different perspective of how those cities were different?
I didn't know Willie when he was playing in New York with the Giants. I just met Willie from the Candlestick Park days. I came up in '63, and I remember when I first met him, I was in awe. And I'm just a kid, maybe 21, 22 years old. And I said, Mr. Mays, it's nice to meet you. He said, Mr. Mays, he said, that was my dad. I'm Willie. And from that time on, he treated me like one of the guys. He treated all the young players with respect. And he was always trying to help young players become better players. That was his love for the sport. He wanted everybody to be as good as they possibly could be. And anytime he could give you a tip or so, because in those days we always talked around the batting cage before the fraternizing rules came out. And Willie'd be out there every day during batting practice for the opposition, just watching and then talking and making you feel relaxed.
Talking to Pete Rose, and one of the things, when you were my manager, we used to always do infield, outfield. I remember coming up when you were my manager, and we'd even back up bases as pitchers. Talk about defense and working on defense, not just yourself, Willie, all of you old-timers. I mean, you played live BP, you play the ball off the bat, things like that the guys today don't do a lot of. I used to go out, Pete, and watch Ozzie Smith do infield by himself because I was so fascinated by how amazing he was. Talk about, guys like Willie and guys like that and what they did every day.
Well, Rob, what guys back in those days, what they recognized, and I don't think they do as much today, and as well as I, there's two phases of the game of baseball. One is offense and one is defense. And when you don't have the bat in your hand, you got to work your ass off to play good defense. Now, if that's going out and working on line drives, fly balls, and stuff like that during BP, then you got to do that. And Willie was always in the outfield running balls down, making, shagging. I guess that's what you would call it today. And he always took real pride in the way he played the game of defense. And I know pitchers that pitched for that team really appreciated. They knew that you could hit the ball left center to right center, and Willie was going to run it down. That's just the way he was. And he understood the importance of defense as he did the importance of offense. And, he hit 660 home runs. That's a lot of home runs for a guy that played at Candlestick Park, because that wasn't the easiest ballpark to hit home runs in. So I got to take my hat off to Willie as a complete player. Probably, if not the most complete player ever. Certainly, if he's not, he's one of the top 2 or 3.
But I also got to think, Pete, that he had to be one of the smartest players as well. Because not only physically he's great, but to know where a pitch is supposed to be on a certain count and to get a jump on that probably gave him a leg up over most players in his day, on top of being so athletic.
Well, he understood the game, Rob. And, that's the first thing about playing the game of baseball is understanding the game. Where you playing at? How many outs there are? Who's the home team? Who's the road team? What inning we in? Those are all things you got to know today if you're a baseball player. And Willie was certainly on the top of the list of knowing all those things when he was playing a game of baseball. It wasn't just a game. It was a philosophy. And he had a great philosophy on how to play the game of baseball, how to play the winning game of baseball. That's what I liked about Willie. He was always on a winning team, and he did the most he could every day to help his team win the game.
Talking to Pete Rose, and we're talking about the life of Willie Mays. How about the lineups back in the 60s from, say, 65 to 70? How good were those San Francisco Giant lineups with Orlando Cepeda and Willie Mays, Willie McCovey, some of those guys? And obviously you guys were just starting to, build into the Big Red Machine. What was it like to play against them?
Well, they had the Felipe brothers.
That's right, the Alute brothers.
At one time, there was 3 of them playing for San Francisco. But don't forget, Willie McCovey was a great player, too.
Yep.
Jimmy Ray Hart was a great player for the San Francisco ball club as far as hitting home runs. They always had good hitters on that team. And like I said a minute ago, that wasn't the best ballpark for a home run hitter to play in. The fences were decent, but the ball didn't carry there. There wasn't no wind at Candlestick Park. It was right down on the water, but it was an enclosed stadium, and you didn't get much help from Mother Nature when you played the game of baseball.
Talk about him leaving the game. It just feels like 24-time All-Star, a lot of these guys could probably have still done it for another couple of years, but do you know anything about his decision to walk away from being a player?
No, I really don't. I think he just got, the older you get, Rob, the harder it is to keep up with it, especially if you're the type of player that he was, because you expect certain things from yourself, from your body, on a daily basis. And don't forget, Willie was helped, too, by 24 All-Star games, because I don't know what period of time it was, but we used to have, the National League would have 2 All-Star games a year. And that's why Willie had the honor of playing in 24 All-Star games. Because I don't think he played 24 years, but several years of his career, he got to play in both All-Star games during that particular year.
So for you, 17 All-Stars and all the other stuff that you did, what was it? I remember talking to Willie about this years ago. You guys never wanted the other guys to play, so you played the whole game. And talk about that. So, so Willie Mays and all those guys are like, hey, you young bucks, you sit down, because we're going to play every inning of this game.
Yeah, forget that get one at bat and fly. Because another thing about my All-Star competition, Rob, is we won 16 of the 17. The only game we lost that I played in the All-Star game was the 71 All-Star game in Detroit when Reggie Jackson hit that mammoth home run off of Doc Ellis at Tiger Stadium. Hit the transformer on top of the stadium in right field. I've never seen a ball hit that hard and that far. So Reggie hit that ball off that Doc Ellis sinker. He threw it down and ended Reggie. That son of a bitch would have been out in Yellowstone Park. That's how far he hit that damn thing. But Doc Ellis, he provided all the power on that. But the one thing about, and I think that was our National League president. His name was Bill Giles, who was Warren Giles' dad. I remember he used to come in, Rob, and have a meeting before the game. And he'd always emphasize the importance of winning the game to show the world that the National League was superior to the American League. And I remember the first year he retired, the league president didn't even come in the next year to talk to the team. We're all sitting there waiting for the game to start, and we says, where the hell's Chuck Feeney? How come he didn't come in and talk to us? We were waiting for that pep talk that Mr. Giles used to give us, because he really believed. He really believed, as I did, and Willie did, and Clemente did, and Henry did, that the National League was superior than the American League. Why was it? I'll tell you why. Because we had more African-American players. And what does African-American players create, Rob? You know as well as I. Speed.
Yep.
We had more speed in the American League, and that's why we were a better league. And we had great players in the American National League all those years. Well, because the same players were always in the All-Star game. You had Henry, you had Willie, you had Clemente, you had those guys were repeaters as far as the All-Star game was concerned.
Who's close? Who's a guy that's playing in the bigs right now that's close to that kind of ilk, that kind of player?
Oh, man, I'd have to think a while for that one. I mean, there's some great players playing in the League of Baseball, but we're talking about guys that's been around 2, 3, 4 years.
Right.
We're not talking about a guy that's been in 24 All-Star games.
Right.
And I think Willie probably thinks he was cheated because he only got to win one World Series, I believe.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he only won 2 MVPs.
Yep.
You'd have thought with that kind of record he has, 660 home runs, he'd have been an MVP several times. You know, but, hey, Willie didn't ever complain. Willie just there and helped his team win games on a daily basis. And he always had good teammates, too. Why is it, Rob, that good players always have good teammates? It's because they surround themselves with good players. I mean, I figured that out after all these years. Why was I a good player, Rob? Because of Bench, Morgan, Perez, Schmidt, Carlton, people like that. Why was Willie a good player? Because who hit behind him? Willie McCovey, another Hall of Famer. Cepeda, another Hall of Famer. So, you know, good players always have Hall of Fame players playing around them. And Willie was no different. He'd be the first to tell you. Boy, he can't tell us now, but now we have to go on life without Willie Mays, so that's going to be tough.
Absolutely. Well, we'll end on that, Pete. Great catching up with this, sir. You know I love you, and I hope you're doing well.
You're doing a good job, Rob. Keep it up.
Thank you, sir. Talk to you later, Pete. Thank you, buddy.
All right, buddy. Take care.
All right, we'll take a quick break here on the Rob Dibble Show with Ben Darnell on your afternoon drive, live from the Travelers Championship Farmington Polo Club. Sponsored in part by the Farmington Polo Club. Enjoy the thrill of polo matches every Saturday this summer. For more info, go to farmingtonpoloclub.com. We'll be right back on Fox Sports Radio.